Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm Kristin Sokoloff here with my co-host Ron Ward. Today, we are reflecting on the late Charlie Kirk, not just the circumstances of his passing, but the leadership lessons from his life and the scale of what he built with Turning Point USA. You know, Ron, I've shared in previous lessons that I'm an influencer ambassador for Turning Point and have been incredibly impressed by the impact that he has had and TPU has had, especially on youth.
No, it's true, Kristin. I don't know of any other organization that has been that, at least specifically, successful. I mean, he had a very clear vision and went for it, and we're going to talk about that. And we are honored and privileged to bring this episode to you. So whether you admired him or disagreed with him, and by the way, he was fine with that. Just go back and watch any of the videos. But an 18-year-old kid basically developed this national movement that would become what now is world-renowned TPUSA, Turning Point USA. And it's just the journey and the leadership lessons are extremely important. And we saw in the death, who knows, with his wife becoming the CEO. And over at the time we're recording this, I think there was over 100 million views of his funeral. Who knows what's going to happen with this organization? It may grow all over the world. Right.
Because we saw an international response to his assassination. So I can only imagine this being scaled internationally. Before we get into the movement itself, I want to rewind and paint a picture of Charlie as a young man. And in doing research for this episode, I learned a lot, quite frankly. He grew up in Prospect Heights, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And his dad, Robert Kirk, was an architect who even worked on the Trump Tower in Chicago. And his mom, Catherine, spent time as a trader at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange before becoming a mental health counselor. So it was a middle-class, faith-oriented household. And Charlie was raised Presbyterian.
Well, that's interesting. And I don't know if you remembered, Kristin, but I was born in Chicago. I didn't put that in my book because it didn't add any real relevance, but yeah.
So, well, it took away from the Appalachian mountain cred.
Exactly.
Like what?
Never mind. Yeah. No, you could, even in youth, you could see the seeds of leadership. He was active in the Boy Scouts and became an Eagle Scout, which is no easy feat. I was honored to be a guest speaker once at an Eagle Scout award ceremony. And but that early exposure to service and responsibility obviously left a mark. At Wheeling High School, he became known as both an athlete, a standout on the basketball team, and an activist. And I saw some YouTube video footage of him. I didn't know he was a really good basketball player. He once helped organize a protest against rising cookie prices in the school cafeteria. Small thing, sure, but it shows you the willingness to step forward when he thought something was unfair.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw this, but there is a video. And this is, again, here I am, an ambassador, an influencer for TPU. I didn't know that he also played football. I believe he was the quarterback. And he could throw a ball. Like, that was wild. He has the build for it. So I keep talking about him in present tense. So I apologize for that. But he had the build for it. And so it makes sense. But so much that I am learning still. I have to mention, you mentioned Wheeling High School. That is where he went to high school. Unfortunately, they were just recently in the news. There was a plaque. Many high schools have like an alumni wall, like notable alum. So they had him up until recently. So after he was assassinated, someone at the high school removed Charlie Kirk from their notable wall, which is or a notable alumni wall. They did it in the middle of the night without talking to anybody about that decision. And so now there's a huge petition to get him back up there. But what type of failure in leadership? Like, who does that?
Yeah. Kristin, we saw, and I did a post, I said, we saw the best and worst, one gunshot showed us the best and worst
Right.
Of America. So without getting into the politics of that, from a business lesson, you never lose respect and decorum, because I had some employees who vehemently hated each other. And at one point I called two people in. I said, you don't have to have Thanksgiving dinner together, but you are going to work together. And in any organization, no matter what, you have to celebrate differences. Now, if it starts to affect the mission, you have to address it. But yeah, we saw some very disrespectful things, and Chris and I are very open about us being conservatives. But I can assure you, there's some people that I couldn't disagree with more. I would never celebrate their death.
Right.
And I would send my regards to their family, and I would pray for their spouse, kids, significant other, whatever the case may be. I never wish that on anyone. So we do have to come back to a point that's not the answer. But that's not the purpose of the podcast, but I wanted to throw that in there.
So getting back, okay, so this is really interesting again. So Charlie wrote an essay. This is going back to high school, an essay while he was in high school, critiquing what he saw as a political bias in textbooks. And again, this is going back a ways, right? So this was actually published in Breitbart, and that's big. He's a high school student, and he's having an article published in Breitbart. And that opened doors to conservative circles for him. So by the time most of his peers were thinking about college, Charlie was already experimenting with influence, organization, and public communication, which explains why he felt extremely comfortable saying no to a traditional college track and starting something on his own.
Yeah, and Kristin, in his case, there's no question he could out-debate people with high-level degrees.
Yeah.
He had expanded his knowledge. And you know a friend of mine that I'm hoping to get as a guest, but he went to college he had this super high IQ, and it just wasn't for him. He was smarter than his professors. It's just the truth. So at age 18, he co-founded Turning Point USA with Bill Montgomery, a longtime conservative grassroots organizer who was active in then the Tea Party movement, and more than 50 years Charlie's senior, if you can imagine. And from a suburban kid with no connections to running one of the most influential youth organizations in America, that's a trajectory that we should unpack.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, I think it's important to know, we talk a lot about, like, how do you handle failure and adversity. And so Charlie's path wasn't smooth. He faced early rejections that mattered. And for instance, he applied, and I didn't know this, he applied to West Point in his senior year of high school, which is one of the most selective service academies in the country, but he was rejected. He did later note that slot, even though he had higher test scores, that slot went to someone, quote unquote, far less qualified. So I'm assuming there was maybe a DEI aspect there. I cannot confirm that, but he was rejected there. And I think that's important for us to realize.
Yeah, and ultimately he was accepted to Baylor University, but instead enrolled at Harper College. It was just a community college near Chicago. And he dropped out after one semester to focus full-time on building Turning Point USA. Again, at the age of 18, let that settle in.
Yeah.
And of course, that decision changed the directory of his life forever. Kristin, before we go into details, we go into details, there is a story that you shared early on one time. Could you tell us, because you became an influencer and you've already mentioned that you're involved with Turning Point, but there was something that happened and I think it's noteworthy because of all of your influence and your followers. Could you tell us that story? What got you into that sphere?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, so basically what happened was, and most people know, I live in the Portland, Oregon area. And in 2020, so this is June, is when I got started with influencing. So I would consider myself a political influencer, but political commentary is what I do. And we were dealing with Antifa here after the fallout of George Floyd passing. So it was rioting and just absolute chaos in our beautiful city of Portland. And my husband is a Portland police officer. And at that time, he worked nights and weekends. Not that the weekend matters, because these folks must not have jobs, because they were just going, 124 consecutive days. So basically, it brought all of this madness to my doorstep. And I was so disgusted with what I was seeing internationally, but mainly, just across the United States. It just felt so unfair about how things were being spoken about in the media like that. It was peaceful, mostly peaceful, when I know my husband's coming home, in the morning telling me all about what he had been facing throughout the night. And I knew it was complete lies that the media was telling. And so I started with TikTok, actually, because TikTok really took off in 2020, for those who are not aware, during the pandemic. And I just recorded a rant and posted it, and it went viral. So I went from 0 to hundreds of thousands of views and people communicating with me. And I realized that there was a need in the Pacific Northwest for the truth to be told. And so I started as an alias, because, as you know, Ron, I worked for the bank still. So I had to have an alias for obvious reasons. And everything I did was after hours, nights, weekends, type of stuff online. But it really just fueled my fire, and just to get the truth out there. And that's why, everything that's happened with Charlie recently, it's just like that's what he wanted, was fighting for the truth. And that's what I have always wanted too. And not everyone is wired for this. In the beginning, it did sting when I would get hate mail. I mean, even today, I get nasty messages every single day. But I really feel like God made me this way. I'm really tough, and I can handle, all these verbal attacks that I receive, and I'm not going to stop. Right. So I just feel like sometimes people are put in a place and something ignites them. And you have to just keep running with it. And that's what I've been doing for over 4 years now.
Yeah. And to take leadership lessons, guys, I hope you realize courage is key. And there's so many talents, so many opportunities that get buried because of a lack of courage. And I told someone, they asked me to describe my book. And I said, if I had to, they said, describe it in a sentence. I said, building of courage to lead, because you can't have integrity without courage. Because imagine you want to tell the truth, but you're facing obstacles. You might tend to minimize the truth just to protect yourself. So, Kristin, we've gone into a little bit of the early life. We've realized that for Charlie, it really was his convictions over education or anything else. And there are situations in life, I don't discredit educations, but there's a lot of different ways to educate yourself. And most everyone that I talk to says experience always wins over academia. And that's what Charlie chose to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to rejections, those rejections and choices that happened to Charlie, those would derail so many people. I hear it all the time, right? But then for him, it became fuel. It was the fuel to his fire. And that is a trend that I hear from successful people. Like, someone told me I couldn't do it, and that became fuel. Like, I was going to prove them wrong, right? And so I think that is the right approach to have, is really let that rejection and that sting be the fuel to your fire.
Yeah, and whether this is good or bad, I told you I always have. I'm competing with someone. It's usually myself, but I love competition. That drives me.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Kristin, let's look down to building a movement, and we definitely know that. And I'm still trying to fathom the number of people that came out to the service, the funeral.
Yeah.
And it was broadcasted worldwide. And when you see something like that, because it was very difficult, whether, again, there's people who disagreed, and I'm not going to say I 100% agreed with him. It's rare that I disagree, but I'm saying that's irrelevant. The movement, I when he was shot, I prayed that he would live, but then he didn't. And it's hard to see God's wisdom. And you may be listening to this and you wonder the same thing. But when yesterday, I was like, oh my goodness, this looks like a revival worldwide.
Yes.
I mean, it was something to behold. So take us into movements and not messages, Kristin.
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that speeches don't scale by themselves. Structures do. So let's look back between 2023 and 2024. TPUSA grew headcount into the hundreds and revenue into the tens of millions. And there's evidence of back office machinery, the hiring, the field operations, events, the content, finance. You know what they did very, very well, and they continue to do well, is he's doing all of these on-campus debates and discussions. They do such a great job at TPUSA of doing the snippets, and so that you can hear the best of the best of, and sometimes the worst, right? Like there was a lot of, he faced a lot of adversity during those conversations. But they played it two ways. They did the most absurd conversations that he had with people, and then they also did some of the most touching, where you could see someone's life changing through that conversation. So they did a great job. They continue to with content.
Yeah, and it cost him his life, but I will say he began to normalize debate. And there was a comedian, I just saw a thing, she come out and she was building it up. She said, we used to do this crazy thing in the 90s. And she said, it's silly, I'm ashamed to mention it, but she said it was called critical thinking, where you think for yourself. And anyway, it got a good laugh because people knew how sarcastic she was being.
Yeah.
It's very important for you aspiring leaders and current leaders. You've got to have, movements require repeatable operating systems. And you got to have field reps. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Chapter playbooks, data, pipelines, all of these things. Systems have to be in place. No matter how charismatic you are, there has to be an organizational structure.
Oh, yeah. And we had John on last week, and I would say what resonated with me the most is implementing KPIs, so key performance indicators. And, that might be for someone in the sales world, that is just, everyone has that in the sales world, but it is difficult when you're not selling to have KPIs. And like I said, I worked for a national bank that didn't have KPIs for back office paper pushers, right? That still had, these paper pushers had huge jobs. They just weren't sales, and there were not KPIs. So it was very hard when you don't have a KPI, Ron. I'm sure you can attest to this. It's very hard when you have somebody who is not performing and you don't have KPIs, it's much more difficult to be able to go down the corrective avenue, right? Like to eventually, hey, they're not working out. Okay, well, what indicators do you have, right? It's difficult to prove to HR that you need to move somebody onward when you don't have those indicators or something measurable. So in researching TPU, they had clear KPIs. So they had campus reps. Each of them had a KPI, which included the amount of chapters started, the attendees, volunteers that had been onboarded. And, analysts have even described hundreds of organizations at its peak are looking at this model. And I think that's really important to take away.
Yeah. Kristin, I'm implementing, and this is free to you folks. You always get some nuggets, I hope, from this podcast, but I'm implementing, feel free to steal this idea, KPWs, and these are key performance wins. And I tell everyone that our brain is programmed to comfort, protect us, and it doesn't know when we win. So I have people mentally give themselves a pat on the back when they send a good email, because your brain needs to see you winning instead of losing.
Right.
And so there you go, KPWs.
I like that. And, that ties into last week's conversation with John as well, is where we talked about volunteerism, is what we called it at the bank, right? So when people are volunteering, there is an actual physical response that you get when you are volunteering. And I think that that's right in line with what you're talking about.
Yeah. Let's talk about vision strategy, Kristin.
Yeah, let's do it. So TPUSA, they started building small groups of students on campuses and began basically equipping them to expand the movement.
Yeah, and after they started growing, they started looking at things, what's undermining us? And they began to realize that there were professors all over the United States, especially in the Ivy League schools, who were, in their view, indoctrinating students into socialist ideology.
Yeah.
So in 2016, they formed the Professor Watch List, and this began to have an impact, and people began to identify. And then more conservatives, of course, when you start something, Charlie was on the forefront. This was started, by the way, the Prove Me Wrong, Steven Crowder began to do that. And I just heard him talking about all the threats and things that happened to him. But people, when they began to see in 2016 the courage that Turning Point was exhibiting, they began to identify and talk about these professors, and it made a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can you imagine? It's basically, in my opinion, it's accountability, right? And it's putting the truth out there. So if you end up, if your child, because I think parents were looking at it probably primarily. So if your child goes off to college and they get this professor, here's what to expect.
Yeah.
And I think it's not even extreme. It's just a basic accountability for here's how they conduct themselves.
Yes.
And have you ever seen before and after pictures, Ron, of let's say a female, especially is what I see, a high school senior, and she looks, she's beautiful, looks clean cut, goes off to college 3 years later, looks like someone that just crawled out of the streets of Portland, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what is happening largely in these colleges that go unchecked.
And you know what I think about, Kristin, is we don't think enough about the parents. I know they might have made a poor decision sending their child to some place like that, but they don't understand the power and influence of peers.
Yes.
And we are going to do some leadership series on parenting. But Kristin, I wanted to note the way the structure, we're talking about vision, and Charlie was exceptional at vision casting. So he knew clearly what he wanted with Turning Point. So then he began to have the student action summits. And that's when because you can have your little small groups, but there's something powerful about people coming together.
Yeah.
And so he began to, he saw that immediately, and those began to grow and expand. And then he started a podcast. And he utilized social media masterfully. So all of these things, even in our coaching space, all of our certified coaches, we have a monthly call, and it gives a time for you to see other coaches. There's always something. I had someone tell me a long time ago, they were going to this conference, and I made fun of them a little bit because they were spending a lot of money. And I'm like, you could use that money on your business. Yeah. And this was female. She looked at me and said, Ron, I need this. And it didn't ring true until I realized you're with like-minded people. You're you're feeding off that energy. Right. And Turning Point did this masterfully.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just attended that, the Student Action Summit in Tampa in July. And that's where Jeff, one of our other not speakers, but one of our guests.
Jeff Souse, yes.
Yeah. He was there speaking. And, this, Charlie's assassination has really touched him. If you go and look at his social media,
I did.
He was there yesterday. He's been deeply impacted. Something that really stood out to me is he said, Charlie believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Yeah. And Charlie put him on stage. And that, when you're saying you have to have that vision casting, someone that like Charlie, who has that ability to help you believe in yourself. Like, I am capable. This is achievable, right? Like that is part of leadership. And I really don't think you can teach that. I think that is something you either have or you don't. You can hone it, but that's a God-given gift.
Yeah. So leaders adapt message and medium. And he didn't wait for the perfect venue. He built one and then clipped, posted, and repurposed training moments into momentum. There were just so many lessons that we can take from this building of TPUSA.
Yeah, absolutely. So something else that we were able to find in our research of, the business side of TPUSA. So they had office hours in public. So what that looked like was they had a weekly open Q&A, and you can do this in your business too, where they had their round tables, right? Or it wasn't even round, but like, the tent, they called them what, tent conversations but anyhow, this can happen you can turn this Q&A into any venue really. So you can have it to where you have your team, and you guys have this open dialogue. And I think that's really what that is about. And it can scale into many different environments. What do you think about that, Ron? What would that look like, say, in your prior world?
Well, I always believed in collaboration, and I saw the buy-in. I saw the impact of that. Now, you got to be ready because, everyone's not of the same mindset. You got to be able to navigate that. And that's why you got to train your leaders, because it can go off the rails. But yes, with the right training and people get buy-in, you grow, you listen. And but the other thing that I had to grow into is I had to be decisive. You got to know there's a time where you stop, you make a decision. I'm talking about if you're implementing change here. But yeah, I think that's also a very unique and needed model as long as you know how to navigate it.
Exactly. And it brings me to when, understanding the right venue. So I remember one of my old area managers, we were having a branch managers meeting, and one of the managers brought up something that really wasn't something that you would bring up in a group setting. And, we talked about when we were talking about the Northwest versus the South, and something we like to say here, which I would say it's passive aggressive, is we go, interesting. I remember my manager goes, and you thought this was the appropriate venue to bring that up in. That's interesting. And I remember smirking to myself because I was like, damn, like, okay, I'm never bringing up a one-off in a group setting. Not that I did, but so I liked how she handled that, and everyone kind of looked.
Bless your heart, Kristin.
Glad it's not us. Glad it's not. Yeah. So, but yeah, you have to know.
Okay, we need to take a break.
Okay.
Kristin, before we go any further.
Yeah.
We're still recording.
I'm like, what's happening? Do you have to go to the bathroom?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I'm doing this for our audience.
Oh, okay.
If I told you couldn't carry a tune in the bucket.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about this.
We were supposed to start with that, folks.
We were. Okay.
So to give you context real quickly, I was telling Kristin about some expressions, and someone who can't sing, you tell them they can't carry a tune in the bucket.
Yeah.
My, brilliant co-host, probably in the Mensa Society, said, "Is it because it has good acoustics?" Now it gets worse.
Actually,
it gets worse.
So I said reverb.
I don't know. I listened. I think you said acoustic.
Person
Either
said
way.
acoustics.
Okay. So then we go on with the genius chess champion, John Witt.
Also from the Northwest.
Thank you for pointing that out, Kristin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So also didn't get it, honestly. So then what's Kristin do? I guess she finally had bothered her. So she must have chat GPT'd it. And tell him you can finish, Kristin.
Yeah, I'll finish. Okay, yeah. So I said it's because the reverb in the bucket, kind of like singing in the shower. Everyone sounds good. Ron's like, no, it's not. So then we have the guest on, like you're saying, John, also from the Northwest. He goes, is it the acoustics? And I'm like, see? So I thought for sure if John and I were both on the same page and he's this genius, right? I'm like, we're totally right. So then I was telling my mom, and my sister at dinner the other night, and they were like, oh, I've never heard of that. You should look it up and see if you're actually right. So I did. I went on ChatGPT, and it's like, it was like, I can see why you would think that, but basically I'm wrong. So I'm like, okay, I'm so sorry, Ron. I have to say that. I have to admit fault here.
in the history of the dirty side of leadership. Have you ever heard that, folks? Ron's right, Kristin's
Ron's
wrong.
right. Yeah. I was just so sure that it was like the acoustic reverb. And when I heard John, I'm like, come on.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you guys, you ever heard of a metaphor? You ever heard of an idiom? Anyway.
That is something. In the Northwest, we are very literal.
And you had said that, and it really did confirm that it was very literal. And I will tell you that I didn't touch on a tenth of the expressions in the South. I don't know what it is about the culture, but yeah. Anyway,
that's
let's
funny.
carry on.
Yeah, Ron was like, "This one's gnawing at me. I need to be vindicated here." Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, we're moving into the conviction in the storm, which is so important, and that's that bold aspect of leadership that you really have to be successful. You know, Charlie stood very firm in his Christian faith and conservative convictions, but also kept showing up to debate on camera, on campuses. And, you know, and this was seen by supporters as extremely courageous, and critics pushed back hard. And, you know, that tension, it forged his on the spot thinking.
Yeah, but he would make very clear that he made a distinction between his referred to as Judeo-Christian values versus the politics. So he explained he's sharing a personal belief when he's talking about Christian values, but you know, he understood that there's other beliefs in the government. He didn't try to in the Constitution, he didn't try to silence that. Right. But he was very bold about his personal beliefs. And Kristin, the greatest supervisor that I've ever had, Dave Stevens, I've given him credit before, and he's facing a real obstacle. Please pray for him. But he was not a person that broadcasted faith, but you didn't have to be around him 2 weeks to realize this guy's got something other people don't have. Yeah. And he just had this moral clarity. He had this way to encourage you. I credit him for teaching me to write. I came out of college. I was a terrible writer, and Dave would methodically go through my writings, and we would talk it through. And I owe him so much. And but he was clear about his faith. He didn't preach, but you definitely knew it.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see a lot more of that publicly.
There's no doubt. It's already happening.
I was going to say we're already seeing it. Out of all of the speakers yesterday, I believe every single one mentioned Jesus Christ, right? Not just God, because I think that can be stretched into different directions. But that was wild to see. And, I want to talk about his legacy in motion here. So after his death, tributes poured in from leaders, but that legacy endures. That is institutional. And that's, you're going to see that in staff and chapters, funding, alumni, in this trained habit of civic engagement.
No, it's very, very true. And, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, even mentioned when he was running for the Senate that Charlie was one of the first people he called looking for advice and so forth. And of course, Charlie stepped up and he began to, of course, he really favored J.D. Vance, and along with Donald Trump Jr., really pushed Trump to select Vance as his vice presidential running mate.
Right. Yeah, no, that is noteworthy. Absolutely. That's really, if you think about it, that's social capital as strategy.
It is.
And, leaders, they build networks that open doors for others. And that multiplies impact beyond your own role. And, I would say I do that. It's so funny because I remember when I was getting involved in something and they were looking for influencers. And I just wanted to have some of my other influencer friends be able to get involved as well, because it was a great thing, and there were events and all sorts of stuff included. And I remember reaching out, and people were like, "All right, so what's the catch?" I'm like, "There isn't a catch. I'm just telling you about it because it's something I'm engaged in, and I'm excited for the opportunity, and I wanted you to be able to have this opportunity also. And I think that, when you do that type of stuff for people, one, I think it's somewhat rare, unfortunately, that someone is looking out for others, even though there isn't a personal gain. But, just talking about opening doors for others, that is something that will stay. People will remember you forever if you do that.
Yeah, and Kristin, I've made a lot of mistakes, but one thing I pride myself in is people who do well, I try to promote them. I try to help them get business. I made a funny joke to myself. I cracked myself up, but I keep a letter file, and I was looking at all the reference letters I've written for people, and I was like, no wonder I can't get anything done. I'm writing reference letters. I made that little personal joke.
Yeah.
But that is what we should do. We should always promote. And Kristin, you put I asked Kristin when we logged on, because I did a post that had about 10 times the number of views I usually get. I said, did you repost this? And she did. And it does help. That's part of what we do. And great leaders always multiply, and great leaders pour into other people. Great leaders support, guide, direct, and root for. And one of the greatest things you can do is be someone else's cheerleader.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that it's funny that you bring that up, because even I don't even think about it. It's just ingrained in who I am. I posted this video and it went viral, and the song that I used for it is one of my friends who's a country singer, Josh Scott, and I used this great song that he recorded in July, and he messaged me. He's like, oh my gosh, I have so many new downloads. Like, thank you so much. And for me, and I didn't go out of my way to tell him I did that. He just happened to come across my content. But that stuff, I just do it. I don't think, oh, am I going to get a kudos for this? No, it's like, I just do that. And I think people could, if you could just start thinking about, this is to the greater audience, think about others, and not always putting yourself first. Think about how you can help others, and just have that be part of your MO. It will not only does it feel good to know you're helping someone else, but it's the right thing to do, and can make a tremendous impact.
Kristin, someone asked me one day, how do I start building my influence? And I said, just start encouraging other people and watch what happens. And sure enough, over a period of time, people started coming to this person for advice, but they would just saying like, how, what are you doing? They would be like, oh, that's great. And I said, it takes a while, but it starts to grow, because, people are getting that dopamine. They're going to like you.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I just mention one thing before we forget? Because I didn't put this as a note or a talking point, but not only did Charlie debate, he gave advice. So if you go and watch these clips, people are asking. I remember one that stood out to me. A girl says, my dad's a liberal, my mom's a conservative. They both want to have political conversations, right? And he didn't tell her, oh, you should go conservative. Not at all. He said, honor your parents, right? Like, he quoted some Bible verses. He's like, maybe you can talk the Bible with them. You don't need to talk politics. So, and so he was giving her advice, and that was what he did. I would say half the time he was debating people with opposing views, and half the time he was giving advice. And that really meant something to me. And it showed me that he wasn't just trying to drum up Republican votes, right? He actually truly cared about the well-being of these students.
Yeah. And look, I'm going to be very brief on this, but we've talked about how it was organized. They always had capacity planning, back-to-back tours require ops calendars, security protocols, and volunteer staffing models, donor relations. You got to have money. It's the reality.
Yeah.
And every time someone talks to me and they're trying to sell me, and they go, for me, it's not about money. I go, that's a flag to me. So it is about money. It takes resources to do these things. And we mentioned, events double as stewardship touch points. You need touch points. People need to be impacted. They're not going to follow you. And they were masterful at that. Stage time, backstage briefings. You don't want someone to go off the rails.
Right.
I had someone in a meeting one time that asked a question to the head of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. It was inappropriate. You can better believe they were in my office about 30 minutes later.
Yeah.
They did not get my approval, and it was more of an accusation than a question. And then
Yeah.
data. In today's world, you got to have data. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things everyone does look at followers, but Kristin knows me. I have to there has to be a benefit to me. I don't just try to hope 10 people will like me.
Yeah.
I want to see how that parlays either into influence, money, it's something.
Right.
And, but in today's world, you better be able, we talked about KPIs. You
Mm-hmm.
better be able to use data to find out this worked, this didn't work. Maybe, we need to go this way. We talked about it before that you want to create crisis to see how you would respond. Or if you have a major problem, then you got to be able to go back, rebuild that, or reverse engineer and say what went wrong. So they were masterful at that. And if you're going to be successful, you better know how to run those numbers, or digital numbers, as we would call them now.
Mm-hmm. No, I love everything you're talking about. And it made me think of one of the speakers yesterday during his memorial. She was one of his original, and I don't remember her name, but she was one of the original funders. So he came to her, I believe he was like 18, 19. He was just getting it started. And she's wealthy. And she said, if you raise, she's like, how much do you need? 50,000. Okay. You raise the first 25, then I will match you. And she said within 24 hours, he had raised the first 25. And then she's like, and it kept going and it kept going. And then it got into the millions. He raised $1 million. We matched $1 million. Right.
Yeah.
So, it's really cool to hear those stories. Like, I know even like just local politicians and being involved in campaigns, like fundraising is difficult, and it takes a true talent to be able, because you talked about vision casting, Ron. You have to vision cast to get people to open their wallets.
Yeah, you do.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Kristin, let's do I think we've covered the faith and other components. Let's do kind of an actionable recap for our listeners.
Yeah, I think
Start
that's
us
great.
out.
Yeah, so if we want to look at TPU's successes, right? Because it's been very successful and continues to be. You want to do something similar. So you can launch a 90-day proof. So start before you're ready. And this is something, oh my gosh, Ron, this one really speaks to me because, for instance, I managed a telemarketing office when I was in my very early 20s. And I would see some people like reading the script over and over and over and over again. And I'm like, just smile and dial and get going, right? And that's how I am. So starting before you're ready, that's like my mantra. But a lot of people, they freeze up and they want to be perfect. And that's just, that's going to hold you back in a lot of ways. So be well read, but then also you're never going to be like 110% ready.
That's right.
Get started and learn from that 90-day proof.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're Gen Z, when Kristin said dial and smile, she's talking about dialing a phone.
Smile and dial. Oh, yeah. No, seriously, we did have to dial an actual phone. And then we got auto dialers, and then I went on to banking. But yeah, literally dialing.
What else?
All right. So design the system. You want to document your people, process, platform, pipeline, the 4 Ps there. What would that look like in, let's just say, your old world, Ron?
I told you SMART goals. And of course, when you are, remember, in an academy, like when I had someone under supervision, you had conditions of supervision. So they had to abide by that, but you would do everything in your power to hook them up with, make connections so that they would build and think differently, and all that criminogenic needs we addressed. But in the academy world, a lot of it was showing up. We would always do skill enhancements. And I found out, sorry, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, but I'm going to rat you out. When we got there were firearms instructors that hadn't shot a gun in 10 years.
Oh, gosh.
They were there doing it, or maybe once a year to qualify. But we required monthly skill enhancement. So you have to put in these processes. And then the platform has to be something that you can measure. The problem is sometimes there's not a metrics. You don't know how to measure that. And of course, the pipeline is always the people. And how it's going and inspiration and all those things. How are you going to deliver this? And for us, a lot of that was verbally. And a lot of it was, scenarios and that kind of thing. So, I had a little bit of an unfair advantage in that regard, I think, to maybe other businesses, but I've had to switch that as an entrepreneur. And we don't have, I don't want to go into that now, but we will at some point, because Kristin, I did jump in head first, and I do believe in that, because it causes you to learn so much quicker. But I can tell you that even writing a book now, I'm able to help people not have the pitfalls that I did. So in your 90-day proof, try to have a good advisor in there, a good mentor.
Yes, I love that. And even early on, we talked about Charlie had a mentor who was 50 years his senior, his co-founder. So Charlie knew the importance of a mentor also, or even you could call him a coach too, right? Someone that was right there helping him throughout the process. Something else when it comes to your team, meet them where they are. So, there's going to be, people are going to bring different skill sets to the table. And I think as a leader, one of the most important attributes we can have is identifying what somebody is capable of, and then helping them believe in themselves, and then placing them in the right role. And cheerleading them through that. So a lot of times it takes encouragement. And that's why you'll find when people reflect on who the most impactful leader they had was, it was someone that encouraged them and helped them believe in themselves. That's what resonates and that shapes them for life.
I do a lot of coaching on morale, but I tell people talent alignment is overlooked. There's so many people. I coached someone one time that had this outgoing social personality, and they were managing benefits, and they were miserable. Yeah. And they thought there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with the job. I said, no, you're just out of alignment. We need to build a 2-year plan to get you out of that and into something where your personality, someone who's outgoing and vibrant, they're not going to do well working from home, crunching numbers, and not seeing anyone. So a great leader will look at that personality, and you try to create alignment. And as I get older and grow in leadership, I realize how important alignment is.
Yes. I'm glad you bring up alignment, because when I worked at a regional bank, they had, I had gone from the big banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and then I went to a regional bank. And they had something called the universal banker. So it was like someone that could do everything. We talk about cross training, Ron, but this role I did not feel was smart. The smart piece of it, from a corporate standpoint, was you have one person that can do any job in the bank. But the problem is that you're now forcing someone who is a paper pusher and loves organizing and, more of the accounting aspects of banking. You're forcing them to go be a salesperson and be the banker opening new accounts and selling them on this and that. You can't do that. So you have to understand that not every person is able to do every role, right? So as much as I understand the vision behind it, that was a big fail, and they ended up changing it.
Yeah, that's why so many people specialize. I realize, Kristin, once again, I've got a coaching call. Exciting thing to do. Let's wrap it up.
Let's wrap it. All right. So for me, the takeaway is urgency. Charlie stepped into leadership before most thought he was ready, quite frankly. And because of that, his influence extended far beyond his years.
Yeah. And once again, whether you agree with him or not, his story reminds us, step forward, build something that matters, and carry the responsibility that comes with the influence.
Yes, yes. And we hope today's conversation challenges you to think about your own leadership. Even if you're in an individual contributor role, what are you going to build? What are you going to reach? And how will you influence life in others? Are you going to cheerlead? Are you going to encourage them to believe in themselves?
That's exactly right. Everyone should aspire to leave a legacy.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.